Okay, so best decks in the meta right now, let's just jump into it. The first one is Highlander Hunter. This deck is better than the other Hunter deck on this list simply because I think it has a higher ceiling. I think that you could potentially get this deck to be better than the other one at its maximum potential. So assuming you put the same amount of time into each deck and you're willing to sacrifice a slightly worse beginning with Highlander Hunter as you learn how to play the deck than, say, the more aggressive Hunter deck, then this deck is better. Just maximum potential, this deck is better, and I think that my version is the best. Obviously, I'm biased, but I put in some extra cards. I put in the Worgen Infiltrator, I threw in Acidic Swampooze, I put Bone Chew Brawler back in, which some people took out. I put in a Henchclan Hogseed because even though you have Scavenger's Ingenuity and Diving Griffin that you want to combo with Zixer, I think that having this extra early game defense is really, really important into all of the Demon Hunters that are in the meta. And, last thing is different from last time is I put in a Grand Slam back in. I didn't have it in there before because I was like, the meta's super duper fast right now. But honestly, this still works. This is still a very good deck. You have really good late game, and it's one of the reasons why I was justified in putting in the Henchclan Hogseed, because even though, like, oh darn, I don't have the Zixer synergy anymore, I have a Grand Slam as a late game thing that could wipe the board potentially or go face damage. So honestly, you have really good late game already. So if you sacrifice a little bit of your already insane late game to have a slightly better early game to survive that and beat Demon Hunter, your win rate's going to be pretty good. Honestly, my win rate into Demon Hunter is about 60-65%, which is quite solid, and that was after all of these changes. I would recommend this build, but you can go with anyone you want. It'll still run roughly the same. You just want tempo, trade in, get to your late game win conditions down here, and then just win the game off of that. I don't know what people are doing not playing this deck. This deck is, in my opinion, the second best deck in the game, hence the second place spot, and it's got everything you could possibly need in a deck. It has a ton of card draw, it has armor generation and defense. You can create some pretty massive minions early on, whether it be a big Warmaul Challenger that you copy, or even a injured Tol'Vir that you copy early on in the game to take advantage of Rogue's weak early game before they start to combo off. This deck has got everything you ever need. You also have weapons and burst with charge, just in case they start clearing your board and gaining control that way. And you have insane removal with Risky Skipper and Armorsmith for armor, which I've already talked about. This deck is built to beat Demon Hunter. It beats it pretty handily. It beats Face Hunter relatively handily. Highlander Hunter, I think it does lose to a little bit, which is why I put it below it. But I think it also beats Rogue, because again, like I said, if you cheese out one injured minion, rampage it, and then they can't deal with that minion for a while unless they have Flick on curve, then you just win the game, right? And I don't know, what other decks are people playing right now? Mage just beats at least moderately effectively. I will say that Mage is a little bit difficult because if they get all of their free stuff, they can kind of just freeze you and then hit their win conditions, which is a little bit of a bummer. So I would actually say Mage is a bit iffy, but ultimately this deck beats pretty much everything with at least 50%, if not higher, win rates. Like, this deck should be played more. If you're not playing it already, you should. It's fairly cheap. You don't even need Captain Greenskin. He's just kind of helpful. Although you do need Anchor to draw a Risky Skipper. This is actually a really important card, but it's relatively cheap, and it takes a little while to learn, but it's definitely worth it. And yeah, go ahead, play this deck. It's insane. Just do it. So if the other two decks were S+ tier, this is the first S tier deck, and honestly, it's only because it just isn't super great into some of the best decks in the meta right now. I think that hard aggro decks like Face Hunter, Highlander Hunter, Aggro Warrior, and Demon Hunter all kind of abuse the glaring weaknesses of this deck, which is you don't really have that much early game. You have your dagger to control the board a little bit, which is great, I guess, and backstab and stuff, and blackjack stone. You have options, but you don't really have that many one-drops. It's fairly likely that you don't have Pharaoh Cat at the beginning of the game. Turn 2, you have no minions other than Hanar, who you want to save. Turn 3, you have Evil Miscreant, and that's when you get the ball rolling. And you also have Edwin, which you can combo. But at that point, if you don't have one of those cards, and say you have just like a Blackjack Stunner with no secret, or just like a weird kind of weak secret that they can play around, or you have an Edwin without too many cards to combo with, or any of these other bigger cards, like, you kind of struggle. Seal Fate, Evil Miscreant, very good turn 3 plays. You probably have those on curve, and you can kind of come back after a slow turn 1 and 2 with these cards, or an Edwin if you pop off. But, like, if you don't have a turn 3 play somehow, then you'll lose control, and I'm pretty sure you just lose the game because your first 2 turns are just that weak. That being said, I'm still personally 9-6 with this deck. It is still a solid deck, and I would recommend using it, but I think that the reason why it's S tier is because I think it's slightly worse than Highlander, Hunter, and Aggro Warrior, but requires a lot more mastery, right? If it required a ton of mastery, but ended up being way better than the other 2, I would say that, you know what, it deserves to be like S+ in that clump, but I don't see it. I don't think that it's quite as good as those decks. I do think that the skill mastery, once you get there, is slightly above them, but it's not enough to warrant how much more time you need to put in to learn this deck. And I'm making these guides assuming that you guys are trying to, like, come into the meta and learn a new deck to just pick up and start playing. And this is not the deck for you to do that, but if you're willing to put in the time, this is by far a great option. So let's move on to the next one. Now you may be wondering, why the heck is another Hunter deck on this list, and why does it have not a single legendary? Why is it super budget? That's because this deck works. I'm like 6-0 with this deck on ladder right now. It's one of the decks that helped me get to legend during a sticky time last season too. This deck is absolutely phenomenal. It requires almost no dust commitment. It's gonna be on my budget tier list as well, spoiler alert, and that's because it has the tempo of Dragon Hunter, but it doesn't have secrets, which you may think, oh boy, it doesn't have secrets. That makes it worse. It's going to lose some matchups because you're not able to thin out the deck. But that's not necessarily the case, because you have the Stone Tusk Boar combo to just win you the game. Even if you have Scavenger's Ingenuity, Stone Tusk Boar, and then you copy the Stone Tusk Boars, say on turn like 4 or 5 or something like that, whenever you get it, at a certain point of the game, that's going to be 2 mana, 8 damage. And that is the worst that it can be. It only gets better from there. Every single game I'm able to close out with this combo, and sometimes I don't even need the combo to win because you are also a Dragon Hunter with Fairy Dragon into Stormhammer into what's it called? The Primordial Explorer into Rottenest Drake or Big Ol' Whelp. Yes, you don't have Evasive Worm, so turn 4 is at least a little bit more clunky for you. That's a bit of a weak spot for this deck. But even so, turn 4 is generally when I hero power play Scavenger's Ingenuity and then start that whole combo. Or I scrap shot if I've already played Scavenger's Ingenuity and you still get a lot of things rolling. This deck is a great combination of a kind of brainless aggro deck, but also a combo setup deck. So especially if you're a new player and you're trying to learn the ropes, this is a great deck to teach you 2 different styles of deck at the same time. I really, really like it. I like playing both different strategies for it. It's super duper cheap. It has a low learning curve, and I think its skill ceiling, I think it's like overall performance ceiling is only slightly below some of these other decks. And considering it's so easy, and I've been doing so well with it, and people aren't expecting it going in, they're expecting Highlander or Face Hunter, you can sometimes surprise them with this combo because they're not trying to play around it or anything like that by playing a taunt on a very important turn. So, great deck, would highly recommend it. It's super cheap, very good for like a beginner or something, and let's just jump into the 5th one. Okay, so the last one is Demon Hunter. I have 2 different builds. Basically, one build is, it basically runs Spectral Sight instead of the Skull of Galakron, and it runs Priestess and the Fell Screamer for a good turn 4, turn 5 power play that can kind of just win you the game off of that. And then the other one is a more aggressive one that runs Skull of Gul'dan, but no big things. It's just pure, just aggro, like everything, just tons of small minions, tons of cycle, some silence, and just raw face, you know? I think both of these decks are on a similar level. They just have a slightly different playstyle, and I think that they're 5th because even though Demon Hunter feels super oppressive, even though Demon Hunter is the best class in the game according to Hearthstone Replay, this deck, according to Hearthstone Replay, is only the 2nd best deck in the game, so it's on the decline. People are learning to play against it. I think that the 2nd best deck in the game is very good at just like destroying this deck. And I don't know. I think that the nerfs have taken a toll. I think that it's still really, really strong. Don't get me wrong. And it's oppressive. And it's very simple to play. But I think people are learning to play around it. Obviously, you still have ridiculous combos with like Altruist and stuff that are stupid nuts. But I don't know. My win rate against Demon Hunter has been like over the course of the last 2 seasons has been like 61%. I've been doing very well into Demon Hunter. When I play as Demon Hunter, my win rate's only 54% because it's just a pure aggro deck. There are times when you don't hit a good turn 3 or turn 4 curve, and you kind of just fall apart. And I don't know. Unlike all the other decks, Aggro Warrior has other win conditions, or it can gain a ton of armor and play the long game. Highlander Hunter and Rogue have great value late game and decent enough value early game to keep themselves alive. And the even the Hunter has 2 alternate win conditions, just tempo or bursting with boars. This one really doesn't. It's just face or you don't win the game. And if you lose control of the board or the person knows what they're doing, personally, I feel like it's easily played around. I will say that this deck is still good. It's definitely still a top 5 deck, and if you want to play a deck and you want one to climb with, I would say that this is definitely a deck for you, especially if you want one that has been proven to be very, very good and is played by a ton of different people and has more stats behind it than any other deck. This is a fine deck. This is a good deck, but I do think that it's a little below the other ones, at least in my own personal experience. Anyway, going into the honorable mention, let's jump into it. Now, before you question it, everybody, okay, just listen, hear me out. Quest OTK Hunter with King Crush is actually really, really, really good. And let me explain why. Okay, I only have like 5 or 6 games in it, and I am 100% win rate with it over the course of 4 games. So it's only 4 games. It's not the largest sample size, right? But I will say that this deck is really, really good. Obviously, it could be weak into Raw Face Hunter. But then again, so are a lot of slower decks that need to get a value package. That being said, this deck does decent into Demon Hunter. You have 2 card to defenders and bone rates, and you might think like those aren't aggressive decks or cards. That doesn't fit in the deck. Well, they count as 2 summons, so they do fit in the deck and help you towards your quests more than most other cards. You have extra value with these. You have an OTK combo with Leorix and King Crush, but also you don't even always need that combo because you have Unleash the Hounds with your hero power. You're very good at controlling the board with Swarm of Locusts. You can kill off multiple different threats. You have a lot of rush, so people, especially Demon Hunters, can never keep a minion on the board. Rogue can't flick your King Crush because it's been in your hand the whole time, so you know you're chilling on that front. Honestly, this deck has a low sample size, and I will say that this deck definitely isn't on the level of these other ones, and probably isn't even in the top like 6 or 7. But I personally love the deck. I endorse the deck. I have had remarkable success with the deck, and haven't even really been close to losing a game with it yet. I thought that the loss of Leroy would make this unplayable because you don't have Unleash the Hounds combo with it anymore. But honestly, this combo is extremely good. You, even without any of the buffs, even if you don't get Scavenger's Ingenuity on King Crush at all, the Leorix with King Crush combo, if you have 3 of them and you're able to create 3 copies with the Wild Tamer, is 30 damage with the hero power, 24, 3 minions, get 6 or 2 attack each, that's an extra 6, that's 30 damage. And that's assuming you have nothing else on the board, and that's assuming you haven't buffed King Crush at all. Honestly, I think that this card is really, really good, or this deck is really, really good. You have really good early game or decent early game and control. Mid game, you have solid options. Turn 5 is a bit weak, but you have good card draw with things like Cult Master. You have good control with things like Crag, Swarm of Locusts, and Card Defender. Shuma, if you get those minions to stick on the board just 1 turn and they're not able to deal with it immediately, it can be a huge tempo swing. And honestly, I love the deck. Will I say that it is a top 6 deck? Deserves to be the honorable mention? Based on win rate and statistics, I don't have enough of those to judge, but I've had fun. I think it's a good deck, and I've had success with it, and I think it's at least worth a try. It's anti-meta, and people will never expect this and won't know how to play around it, and probably won't even know you're going for an OTK, which means that they think they'll have more time if you're playing a little bit slow. So, all things considered, this deck is solid. I'd recommend it. Hope you guys enjoyed. See ya.